Watching a large number of people turn against Season 2 of The Last of Us after a good first season, and how that mirrors the reactions that players had to the video games, has been pretty entertaining. Certainly more entertaining than this second season was. The first season was good, as it was determined to remain largely faithful to the game through its adherence to the events, the dialogue, the characters, their relationships, and the overall tone of that first game, which was already very theatrical by video game standards. But this season, while still more faithful to the source material than not, is proving exactly why so many hated that second game. The first season had a fantastic story. It explored the harsh reality of a zombie-infested wasteland, the lengths people had to go to survive, not only the infected, but other survivors as well. And at the heart of that story were Joel and Ellie, two survivors thrust together through circumstance who have to learn to rely on each other to survive and who grow close to one another, building a father-daughter relationship just as close as any real one. But with a story that swings between boring and absurd, only briefly touching the decent moments in between, that quite literally killed off the best emotional bond The Last of Us had, that forced all of its focus onto the shoulders of their worst casting choice. The second season of The Last of Us has elicited more laughs and eye rolls than any other emotions. It was always going to be this way though. Just like with the video game series The Last of Us is adapted from, we were always going to arrive at this point, where the story of The Last of Us is really the tale of two stories. The collaborative effort that brought us the story of the first game, the emotional story of Joel and Ellie, and then all of the dog shit Neil Druckmann gave us afterward. Better known as the story of The Last of Us 2. I will always appreciate any efforts to remain faithful to source material, but The Last of Us 2 was somewhere that some serious deviations from that second game would have been readily welcomed with open arms, to say the least. Believe it or not, many players of that second game didn't appreciate their co-main character from the first game being murdered by an unlikable new character, and then being forced to play as that character as the story set out to add justification to her actions. And, in addition to largely robbing the story of Joel and Ellie's relationship, they were also left with a vengeful Ellie and her tale of revenge, a story which undermines the overall theme of survival in a harsh, hellish, apocalyptic wasteland. And that's to say nothing of the ending of that second game, which is another issue entirely that's being left for Season 3 of this show to deal with. Now, given the story and the events of The Last of Us 2, this point we find ourselves at, where the show's ratings have plummeted from those of the first season, was our inevitable destination. And short of completely throwing out that story from the second game, this was unavoidable. And there's just one person to thank for that, Neil Druckmann. Neil was a major player, if not the main player, in crafting The Last of Us, the first game in the series. But that game's story was very much a collaborative effort, and it's clear that other people in the room were hard at work in reeling in Druckmann's worst instincts. Even going as far as to reject Neil's initial story idea for the first game, A Tale of Revenge, for the same reason I stated earlier. But when it came to The Last of Us 2, Druckmann was unchained and free to indulge in his vision for the story, for better or for, you know what, strike that, just for worse. But as bad as it was, that second game was probably more palatable than this second season of the show, simply because the game's version of Ellie was more likable. Largely because that game version of Ellie, while only the product of a mixture of mocap and game coding, had access to more than two facial expressions. A luxury that viewers of the TV series will never have. But we'll talk more about the Bella of the Ball later when we get to everything bad about this second season of The Last of Us. First, let's talk about the good things this season had to offer. One thing that luckily didn't fall off in Season 2 of The Last of Us was the production quality. From top to bottom, the show still looks tremendous. The effects are very solid, and the infected, while not a common sight in this second season, still look incredible. The sets are fantastic, they feel lived in, and they feel like they belong in the world of The Last of Us. They're true to our world, while being very well crafted to look like they would in the game's universe, where things have fallen into disrepair and have started to be reclaimed by nature. The show's also done a great job of filming on location, rather than resorting to CGI or unrealistic looking sets, believing that no set can ever match the real thing. They even worked hard to film during an actual snowstorm to bring that realism to the screen and have the actors themselves bear some of the elements that the characters would be facing. Speaking of the characters, I will give credit to this show for 2 casting decisions that sought to smooth over the choices that the game made. They definitely went a different direction than Abby's, let's say, controversial depiction in the game. And Dina's actress is less nosy and less distracting than her game counterpart. Of course, there was one casting choice in particular that goes back to the first season, which no amount of good casting can overcome, but we'll get to that. And lastly, there was at least one decent episode this season, the one where we had flashbacks to Ellie's birthdays and the time she spent with Joel. But, naturally, an episode like that is bittersweet, as it showed us that very dynamic between Joel and Ellie that this second season was desperately lacking. But that's about it for all the decent things Season 2 had to offer. Getting into the bad of Season 2, the story is simply worse than that of Season 1. A lot worse. Laughable at times. They made the baffling decision to sprint towards Joel's death. Then they slowed everything down to turn half the season into the Ellie and Dina show, which was just a meme-birthing nightmare to watch. It was always going to happen, but Joel's death, especially for those who didn't know it was coming, is a defining moment for when this story went off the rails. So much so that the overall story should be divided into BJD and AJD, before and after Joel's death. Not just because it robbed the story of Joel's presence, relegating the character to bittersweet flashbacks, but because it shifted the entire story onto Ellie's shoulders. And her story alone was never going to measure up to her and Joel's story together, no matter who was playing Ellie. And in the show, we haven't even gotten much into Abby's story, another can of worms pushed into Season 3 that I don't think audiences will care for either. But after Joel and Ellie's story was so well received in the first season, as it was with the first game, you'd have to be blind to not see what Joel's death was going to do to people's opinions of this show. It was going to be so much of an obvious problem that I was genuinely surprised they sprinted toward having that happen in episode 2. I thought for sure that they'd slow walk that event, leaving it to happen toward the end of Season 2, because even Stevie Wonder could see the problems on the horizon. But to the detriment of this show, and the amusement of my hate-watching half, they ran right into that rosebush, and now they're dealing with the thorns. But certainly the biggest thorn in this show's behind is none other than Bella Ramsey. Anyone who was upset with Bella's casting as Ellie in the first season is just swimming in vindication this season. Her face is a problem. Simple as that. And if you think that's harsh, then you disagree with one of the core tenets of Hollywood, where people are supposed to be cast based on their appearance and their ability to relay emotions, largely through facial expressions. And Bella's 2 faces, the blank stare and the angry grimace, can only take the character so far. Bella Ramsey has the range of a $2 walkie-talkie. And here in this season, where she's being asked to be more than a snarky 14-year-old, she's not cutting it. She can't handle any of the physical acting that's stupidly being asked of her, no matter how much the show tries to convince us that she's some force to be reckoned with. She just looks out of her depth at every turn. Whether it's trying to convey utter surprise and fear at seeing her home on fire, or struggling to wield a pistol in a believable manner, the actress turned this character into a one-woman comedy show this season, rather than being the emotional heart of the story she's supposed to be. I mean, really, just watch any scene where she's firing the pistol. It's a laugh riot. She has this habit of whipping the gun forward while she's firing, like she's trying to add some miles per hour to the bullets. Somebody does deserve an award, though, for masterfully turning Ellie into Jay from Jay and Silent Bob. But really, only Neil Druckmann and people like Neil Druckmann would think that viewers would want to go from the emotional, touching story of the first season to a season that was mostly stuff like this.
Suck my dick. That was just me. I was trying to sound like a badass. You don't need to try.
Ooh, you rocking a yeast infection?
I'm pregnant. I'm gonna be a dad.
I told my mother I like boys and I like girls.
Natural gas, baby.
That's one of the reasons I love you.
You love me?
And this scene was one of my favorites. They kiss, and then starts slinging lead all over the place, and Ellie starts firing at an infected with Dina right behind her target. Wow, lucky. And good thing she didn't whip too much oomph into that bullet, lest it blow through the zombie and into her pregnant lover. Really, all of the shooting in this show is just absurd. You had Ellie shooting directly at Dina, the town of Jackson was all lined up and firing back directly into their second defensive line, with the second line firing back into the first line, and no one can actually seem to hit anything when the script doesn't want them to, no matter how easy the shots are. But anyway, placing a charisma void at the center of a story that, if it wasn't boring or absurd, was severely lacking in the emotional beats of its predecessor, was always going to be a disaster. Viewership for The Last of Us Season 2 premiere was up 13% over the premiere of Season 1, so things started off well. But they're not ending as well, as viewership dropped off more than 30% for the second episode and has remained almost 20% lower than the premiere's viewership. And the ratings have fallen off even harder. As of mid-April, the show's audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes fell to 60%, down 26% from the 86 Season 1 scored. And it's only continued its precipitous fall, dropping to 39% a month later, which is where it stands right now. As for me, this season absolutely gets the hate watch label, and while I knew the show was always going to turn out this way as we got into the story of the second game, even I'm surprised by how awful it really was. I said it in my video on The Last of Us after Joel's death, and I've said it here, but I'll say it again. This was inevitable. As long as this show remained mostly faithful to the story of the games, there's always going to be a catastrophic drop in ratings for the second season. And to make matters worse, the second game is substantially longer, so they're only halfway done with that shitty story. So if they don't course correct, which they really can't do at this point, then we're in for another barrel of laughs in Season 3. Did you expect this second season to drop off from the highs of Season 1 as fast as it did? Are you going to be back for a third season, if for nothing more than the laughs and the memes? Let us know in the comments below. And remember to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to HateWatchers for reviews of other current shows and movies. Thank you for facing down this show's problems with us today, and we'll catch you on the next one.